everybody. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. We'll be getting started now. So good evening and welcome to the St Andrews Union Debating Society. We have a very special event for you this evening, replacing our usual debate with a panel discussion. And indeed, we hosted the exact same esteemed academics for a discussion on the exact same topic at almost the exact same time last year. And I thought it was such a terrific event that we would have to run it back. And we will also be returning to some of the same questions and reflecting on some of the same answers from last year, which I hope will prove interesting for you. We would like to quickly preface this evening by saying that we are incredibly sensitive as a society to the fact that the prospects of the Trump administration are quite terrible for many people and probably will continue to be. And we would like to stress that tonight's discussion is centered on geopolitics and kind of the reflection of geopolitics on America, and that's what our panelists have been chosen due to their specialism. That being said, we do have a room just through that corridor where there is a quiet space for anyone who would like to step out and take a breather if you find that necessary. We trust that everyone will be respectful this evening so that we can have an informative and thought-provoking discussion about what the Trump administration means for global politics. We will be recording the panel discussion, but we will not be recording the Q&A in the latter half of the evening. So just to clarify for everyone, for the first 45 minutes, we will do kind of a panel discussion with some prepared questions, mirroring those from last year. We will then take a quick 5-minute break, and then we will have a chance for an audience Q&A. Time for some brief context, if you'll let me. So last year, 2 weeks after the inauguration, we highlighted the following planned actions of the Trump administration as ones to watch: blanket tariffs, designs upon Greenland and the Gaza Strip, leaving the WHO and the Paris Climate Agreement, removing barriers to AI innovation and helping TikTok, and freezing refugee admissions and declaring a national border emergency. Since then, it might be pertinent to highlight the capture of the president of Venezuela, the deployment of immigration enforcement officers as a militarized police force, a military intervention alongside Israel against Iran's nuclear development program, the renaming of the Department of War, and the creation of a Board of Peace. Many of these actions and declarations have proved controversial, both domestically and internationally, with many questioning what the president may do next. Here this evening, to discuss the ramifications of these actions, are three wonderful scholars, each with a different specialism and perspective to bear on these issues. So if you wouldn't mind sort of introducing yourself down the line, a little bit about your work.
Okay, so down the line means this end here. So Rick Fawn from St Andrews, particularly with an interest across Central Southeastern Europe, Russia, Caucasus, Central Asia, and something that was not in that very exhaustive list, Ukraine.
David Andersen from the University of Durham. My specialty is American politics broadly, but I mainly focus on campaigns and elections and figuring out how voters learn about politics and how that influences them.
Murray Leith, University of the West of Scotland. My specialties are Scotland and the United States, where I teach the politics of both with a focus on nationalism and national identity.
Thank you very much. So the first question. Last year, we discussed the most shocking proclamations by the Trump administration, at that point, just 1 week or so after the inauguration. And we highlighted rhetoric around seizing Gaza and the Panama Canal, and also the disruption to Canada-US relations as some of the most shocking aspects. Would you still place those amongst the most shocking aspects of this Trump administration, or what else would you emphasize?
Is that them to me? Is that what I'm going to continue to do?
I guess we can zigzag.
Start with you, and then I'll pick up the second one.
How long? A couple of minutes?
Yes, please.
Okay. Canada-US. I am absolutely stunned at how, in a very few sentences, one of the best bilateral relationships, probably in human history, has been shattered. And I speak something as a political scientist and also as a Canadian Brit or a British Canadian. This is absolutely horrendous. I feared it coming, and in fact, ended up writing what became an op-ed in Greece, of all places, because we were convening in October in advance of the presidential election. And I warned then that even if you don't want to care about Canada, the way a Trump administration treats Canada will be a bellwether, an indicator for the world. And that treatment was faster and worse than I anticipated. And I think that speaks a great deal about the overall situation that we have. Just a second point that I would put in there. I have to say it was coincidence, but I happened to be in Canada when Zelensky was in the White House, and I was out, but I knew the meeting was happening. And I came back where I was staying, and I watched only 3 minutes. I watched the rest of it, but after 3 minutes I had to stop. And I simply did not anticipate that anyone, let alone a president, a vice president, let alone the fact that they were hosting a counterpart from overseas, somebody himself who had been targeted for murder and whose country was being murdered, could be treated that way. And I don't think that's something one gets over.
Yeah, I think the revelations of the second Trump administration have been many. The most shocking things to me, I would say the movement of ICE into urban areas to detain and murder occasionally, not just illegal immigrants, which is the stated purpose, but American citizens, in a manner that the Constitution is supposed to prohibit. And 40% of America freely endorses this. And this worries me because the Constitution of the United States is supposed to be somewhat of a sacred document. And it's something we're supposed to be able to turn to and say, well, the words say this is what we stand for. And very quickly, those words are being erased, ignored, and that worries me domestically. If you look abroad, the seizure of the president of Venezuela, I think is horrifying in several ways. One, it's an astounding declaration of American military might. The idea that the United States military was able to invade another country, seize their president, and get him out without a single American soldier dying. That's amazing and horrifying, because if it can be done in Venezuela, it can be done anywhere. And there are no prohibitions. Nothing is going to stop the President of the United States from ordering this again. And then beyond that, I think this new Board of Peace is, while apparently useless, it's worrisome because it does set up this tone that the international order is over. The United Nations is defunct. The United States is going to govern as it wishes on a global stage in a ways that seems to be absolutely unconcerned with what the rest of the world wants or needs. So those are my top three.
I would like to wake up in the morning and not have to worry about what the President of the United States has said and or done while I've been asleep. I walk by, out the front door of my university every morning, I walk by a statue of Witherspoon, not the bars. It's the same statue that's outside of Princeton. It's an exact duplicate. Well, actually, the one in Princeton's an exact duplicate, but don't tell him. Because he was a Presbyterian minister in prison before he went to the East College of New Jersey and set the tone for what would become personal. He also signed, one of the two Scottish-born individuals that signed the Declaration of Independence. And I revere the Declaration of Independence, as I revere the Constitution of the United States. And I am proud that Scotland has this connection with it, and I get to see that connection every day. And the Constitution is being written over roughshod, as you say. We're seeing American citizens murdered by a masked police force. It's a violation of how many particular aspects of the Bill of Rights alone, I don't know why the Constitution. But one day the President of Venezuela, and there are people who cheer that, what's to stop them doing that to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? What worries me most is actually the relationship between the European continent and the American continent, especially since the end of the Second World War, is gone. And there is nothing to replace that. And there are no guardrails on the president's behaviour. The people surrounding him are not protectionists, they're enablers. And unfortunately, he is also reaching out and establishing relationships with other countries who are traditional enemies of democracy and individual rights across the world. But what really, really concerns me isn't so much all of this, which is a huge concern. What ultimately concerns me is the other great relationship that existed was between the United States and the United Kingdom. And it is under assault. And I think we may get to this later, so I don't want to go into depth to it at the moment. But that's what worries me, the assault on the international order, the assault on people, but most of all, the assault on the American dream. Not the American dream of individuals, the American dream of democracy, the American dream of doing what is right. And that's what I fear foremost.
The most memorable metaphor for me from last year was the notion that Trump was smashing up the levers of power, and whoever could reconstitute them in the following decades would be able to remake America and the American presidency in whatsoever way they chose. We have seen some measure this year of institutions bending, not breaking. NATO has yielded on funding but remains intact. The Supreme Court is exercising some strength now on tariffs despite continual pressure on the Constitution. Do you believe that the levers of power have been sort of totally smashed up? And depending on that, what do you make of the future of America's checks and balances, both domestically and internationally?
So I think the levers are still there, but what's kind of impressive about what the Trump administration has been able to do is they've destroyed the machinery behind the levers. So even though technically the separation of powers, checks and balances, these institutions still exist, they've been hollowed out. They started out with Doge, who led, I think current estimates are about 10% of the federal workforce has been pushed out. And the federal workforce in the United States is something special. It has had civil merit protections for over 100 years. It's very difficult to get a job in the civil service in the United States. These are experts. The United States federal government has traditionally paid these people pretty well to kind of more so than retain them. It's to put pressure on the private sector to raise their salaries. And it has built up for 75 years now a repository of absolute expertise and professionalism. And that's gone. The State Department is over. Those people are gone. They're not coming back. The Department of Energy, Department of Education, everywhere you look, it's gone. And those people are never going to come back into government. And the memory of what they did and how they did it is irrecoverable. So the lever still may be there, but when the next president pulls on a lever, nothing's going to happen. Because the capacity of American government to act is diminished. And beyond that, the trust of American institutions to work is also gone. It used to be that when a president did something, John F. Kennedy said, hey, we're going to go to the moon. And people said, well, that's an idea. But they trusted. If the United States wanted to do something, it was accomplishable. And suddenly NASA's landing people on the moon. It was amazing. Nobody in the United States believes this is possible anymore. People look at American government and say, well, it's failed. It has failed, it's now hollowed out, expertise is gone. There's a widespread belief that American government cannot solve problems anymore. And how you have a democratic system where people don't trust the system, I don't know how it goes on. I think that's the worry going forward.
Yeah, the other big problem with that is the levers may still be there, the shell is still there, but the rule of law is not. I mean, do you remember the Hatch Act? Because nobody else does. I mean, we've given up even pretending. For those of you who don't know, the Hatch Act is supposed to be one of the bulwarks against corruption. Whenever we teach any aspect of America or American politics or history, we talk about the most corrupt presidential administration being that of Ulysses S. Grant. Not anymore. Not anymore. The Trump family seems to have enriched itself in a way that would have been, and not just within the United States, these are international deals. And today, I learned that Iran is reaching out to discuss potential deals with the Trump administration. What you mean is potential deals with the Trump family. And they're basically trying to buy off the American president because they know that the American president can be bought. And that's what concerns me. The next president's going to come along, and they've now learned that yes, you can remake the system in your image. You can remake the system to do the good guy role of government has been proven to be a thing of smoke and mirror.
I'm sure everybody here has your own views, and let me just say, it is something of a challenge to say things that we may not necessarily know. I think we know. And to say only a couple of points on so much of this and in a couple of minutes. I would bridge what's just been said about the depth of the corruption. And I might just make an analogy. In an anecdotal way, in one class I would explain about the Ceausescu family who ran Romania for a couple of decades. And there were 27 members of that family who were appointed to positions. And the leading figures in that family gave themselves enormous and ridiculous titles. And students, your peers, would think that that was something unimaginable, a grotesque fantasy land from somewhere else. We have that in play. You turn on some of the major media, it's Lara Trump interviewing members of her family or her family's administration. We have the extended families of cabinet secretaries. Look at the New York Times fantastic graphic that they did in early January, who are deeply embedded in this. The overseas dimensions, alongside diplomacy. You have these investments, you have members of the immediate Trump family making overseas investments and getting the same into the United States alongside what is supposed to be diplomacy. It's really quite unfathomable, but it's there. I want to give one note, because I don't think we've had a note of optimism. Okay, that's a promise. Trump came in about draining the swamp. Do we remember that? Some of you are perhaps blissfully young enough that you may not. Way back it was draining the swamp. Right, Washington. I hope that a real swamp can be drained. I think there's, and I'm speaking obviously, I say to many of my American friends, of whom I have very many friends, and I partly went to the States in January to shore up some American friends, literally, okay? I think the United States is capable of tremendous resilience. And I think, to borrow an old Soviet ideological term, when there's a correlation of forces, when enough get together, then I think there can be some damage limitation and restructuring. It's not easy by any means. And I think this fantastic, and I mean that negatively, decapitation of the civil service, and this affects me directly because there are an awful lot of Americans who I know who have been laid off. Good people, extremely capable people, who've been doged. Can you imagine a year ago thinking that that would become a word? Okay. So the note of optimism is I think the depth of the destruction is being known. It's not being known wide enough, but it is being known. And there are more and more who are deeply, deeply disheartened by it. So let's hope that this is going to be, it's awful, but let's hope it's going to be something of a blip.
Between the claims against Greenland and other inflammatory rhetoric, particularly on funding, Trump has put significant pressure on NATO this year. How do you think Trump and America view NATO, and do you think the alliance will come under further strain this year and through the remainder of the administration?
In a previous life, I got to wander around the halls of NATO command, I was the chap who aided the chap who held the doors open. Okay, trust me, I was, you know, the only decision I was allowed to make was what I was having for lunch in the cafeteria. But NATO was an enshrinement, as I commented on earlier, of the post-war order. And America stood as the beacon through. And then, once again, I appreciate, you know, I'm looking at people, you know, who won't appreciate, before the Iron Curtain, America was that shining city on a hill that everybody looked to, knowing that they would one day ride in and free the people of Central and Eastern Europe. Now, the people of Central and Eastern Europe know they're not coming. Not only do they know they're not coming, they fear that they're actually going to be operating with the bad guys. This is a problem for us here in the UK more than it is anywhere else. The embedding of our military with the Americans is so deep that people don't even realize it. I mean, heck, you know, we can't fire nuclear weapons without American consent, for one. That's the common one everybody points to. But military intelligence operates cheek by jowl with the Americans. Not only that, but you know, internal intelligence operates cheek by jowl with the Americans. FBI, CIA, MI6, MI5, they're all in the same offices. And we're trying to figure out ways behind the scenes to stop sharing information because we can't trust where it's going to go. We're trying to figure out how not to hold combined exercises. We're trying to figure out how to build our own weaponry, which, by the way, the British do really well, but of course we use a lot of American patterns and ideas. We've spent so long, and excuse the expression, but in bed with the Americans. We don't know how to get out of it. But it's a growing realization that even if there's a stop or a reverse of the direction of travel, we can't afford to be so closely intertwined in the future.
In a sense, that's a positive. Right? I mean, the amount of European, and I include the United Kingdom in that, the amount of European cooperation in the past year is quite significant. Now, of course, there's a huge operational legacy to overcome. You know, intelligence sharing, kill switches and operating systems, licenses, and all that. But the realization is important in itself. It's sad that we've seen breakdowns in that cooperation already. The French and Germans aren't agreeing on a fighter jet that looked like it was a no-brainer. But hopefully there'll be more of that, and the need is there. And at the same time, I mean, a bit of credit to Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General. You know, in playing up to Trump, everybody realizes, you get to this guy with ego, put his name on things, and suck up to him, right? I mean, it's probably distasteful, and a lot of these people doing it are very, very clever. I don't know just how moral they are, but I'm sure they know they're greasing a system. And there are some achievements in that. And when Rutte acknowledges a fact, which is that a lot of NATO countries were underspenders. You know, Canada was an underspender along there with Belgium. You know, we have been in defense terms, in some ways, depending how you analyze these things. Yeah, we have been something of a freeloader, and yeah, I think pretty much all of NATO needed to up its game, and that's a positive there. And I think it's important that, and it is being done, that NATO officials, national officials in NATO countries are saying this back to the United States. And in a clever way. You know, Trump, you woke us up. Clever you. And we're responding to what you wanted, right? And we're responding to what you wanted. Therefore, you should understand where we stand now. And hopefully, I mean, this is partly why the civil service decapitation is really problematic. Because the real professionals in there who understood what was needed and how you keep things going and had long-time counterparts who they worked with, right? So when the politicians were saying incredibly stupid things, you still had the professionals keeping things going. I mean, we are damaged that way. Right? And I think it's extremely apparent with the State Department. It's astonishing what has happened there. But I would still hope that in some quadrants, there are some who are, that is in the United States, who are trying to keep these things going. And I think there will be elements of US self-interest that will come back to this. So I don't think it's, I mean, we've said an awful lot of negative things. I can do negative, okay? But I think there are elements of possibilities still in this. And we find them in some places that are hard even for the most cavalier, unconventional politician to destroy. And seeing that certain interests appeal to him, I think that's the way we have to go. Work, find those common interests, and work with them. And there are elements of that still within NATO. Right? And there are things the United States needs. If they want to do war in X or Y place, they need their allies. They need air access. They need bases. They need, I mean, it's very, very powerful. There's a lot they still need. Right? And we do a quid pro quo, because that's what's understood currently.
That's really interesting because
You're going to disagree.
my feeling right now is that the United States is functionally leaving NATO. And that's going to remake the world in a lot of ways. In some ways, I think it's really beneficial for Europe because through NATO, there's been this tacit acceptance of American leadership because the United States military is bigger, badder, and more capable than any other force on the planet. Probably more capable than the rest of the planet put together. It's enormous. But by ceding that leadership to the United States, I think Europe has kind of accepted a backseat role, and it doesn't need to. I think when the United States formally starts questioning its role in NATO, I mean, if Europe ever had a reason to call on Article 5 and say to the United States, we need your military might, does anybody believe that Trump is going to say, yes, we're there? No. And if you don't believe they're there, you have to react. And I think the reaction is going to be a militarizing Europe. And that doesn't have to be a scary thing. A Europe that has its own military force capable of operating on the world stage in a way similar to what the US does might be a better thing. Because I trust the rationality of multiple nations working together than I do with one lone actor. The United States military was able to be co-opted by a president. One man, won an election, he changed the world. I don't think that could happen with a European force. If there's some kind of united European force that replaces NATO, that might be a safer alternative. I'm very interested in this idea that the United States does rely on other nations in order to accomplish a lot of its goals. And the big question now is Iran. The two places where the United States would launch aircraft to bomb Iran is the UK and the Chagos Islands, which is the UK. And the UK has to authorize those flights. So while the entire world is staring at President Trump saying, are you going to attack Iran? Is this going to be another Middle East war? The UK is playing a vital role in this. And I'm really interested to see what happens. Bated breath.
Well, it's a good time, I suppose, to move on to Anglo-American relations. Last year, the panel was extremely pessimistic about Anglo-American relations. And yet it seemed, for most of this year in some regards, that maybe on a personal level, Anglo-American relations were stronger under Trump than Biden, particularly with Starmer and Peter Andersen doing better, I think, than people could have expected until this month. And so with Peter Mandelsen's dismissal over the Epstein files, the reimposition of tariffs, there seems to have been a recent ebb. How would you characterize the past year of Anglo-American relations, and what are your predictions moving forward?
Well, I personally think the best thing that happened was having Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. I know he's not necessarily the most popular person in the UK, but I think in many respects he was the best placed party leader to deal with Donald Trump. You know, he once again, a bit like Rutte, he recognises how you work with, you know, someone like Donald Trump. The other thing, and believe it or not, we do have got going for us, we have to remind ourselves that Donald Trump is the most Scottish American president ever. Yes, I know. And he's, you know, from that perspective, there is a little bit of grease that helps those wheels go round. At the same time, it is one of the things I do worry about, because ultimately it's going to come to a head. As I said, the intertwining of our military units are significant. We're already finding ways to try and operate around those. Five Eyes is rapidly becoming Four Eyes, and Five Eyes intelligence rapidly becoming Four Eyes, especially when it comes to Ukraine, because the Ukrainians are outright saying, we can't tell them things because it ends up in the Russian desk. So the other thing we need to remember is, and I appreciate Donald Trump sitting in the White House and controls the leaders' powers, the intertwining of the Americas and the United Kingdom is several hundred years of history, and a myriad of personal, professional, business, and educational relationships. And that's where my optimism lies, in the individuals of the United States and the individuals who have relationships with people of the United States. Those are the potential brakes on this runaway train. The special relationship, it's always been more of a myth than it has a reality when it comes to practice, but it does exist in the minds of many, many people, and that gives it some power.
Sure. Is that, to me? Okay. You're gonna, I think this holds for all this, you're gonna have to forgive us that we don't remember exactly what we might have said in this venue. Remember that we have many different venues too. So I may have said that while the Anglo-American relationship is a special relationship, it is, however, one of very many. And really, when you're in DC, you see every country, and many other actors as well, really trying to jockey out to have their own kind of special relationship. And certainly Canada thought it had that too. It's not to compete with Britain, but it is to say that there ain't just one special relationship. Now, I know you asked us about the Anglo-American relationship in this, but I think we need a certain amount of context, right? That there are others who think this way. I'd certainly agree that what is important but not powerful enough are called the societal connections. My suspicion, far more about this than I do, my suspicion is that Trump having a Scottish mother doesn't get us any tangible benefits. Maybe golf courses, more than the mother. Right. The Keir Starmer side, as comical as it was, but I did think hey little boy, I brought something special for you, a letter from the king. That is a good piece of, and I think that was clever. That's backroom clever committee work. What do we do? What do we do to get Trump on side, right? What does he want? Do we give him this toy or that toy? The letter from the king, right? Because the Trump family, it's the whole family who came to Buckingham Palace the first time. They posted these pictures of themselves, like giddy people in the palace, right? Play on that. So there are ways of massaging this, but I think the best thing to do is keep appealing to direct interests, not the family monetary interests, unfortunately. And others are doing that far better than we are. That's a problem, okay? But where there are state interests, and that may be things like using bases. I'm not sure that history and culture and that is a strong lever in this case, because the transactional, which we'll probably talk about in another dimension, is so very, very profound here. And you can have the Trump et al. Can have extremely good working relations, say, with Gulf state countries. Right? So, the transactional really does, I hate to say it, trump, long-standing history, common interests, and so forth. So I'm slightly pessimistic on the meaning of the Anglo-American relationship per se, but also in this context. But if there are elements in it to exploit them. And I think the Starmer government, and again, we've heard, and you may feel this yourselves, I don't know, there are a lot of issues possibly with that government, but I think in playing the hand that Britain has towards this entirely mercurial White House, it's been played relatively well.
I agree with that. I think the idea of a special relationship requires an understanding of history and culture and how we all got here. And it has worked in prior administrations because just about every other president in the history of the United States has assumed the office, but they haven't been the office. It's a role you play. as the American president, and that is nested in the history and traditions of the country, and there was a special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. Trump was elected precisely to throw all that away. His base wants to get rid of a lot of the international ties that they feel like are constraining America. And Trump himself doesn't care about history. He doesn't really care about tradition. He wants to blow up the world and remake it in his image. So if you talk to him about the special relationship, I think he might laugh. He doesn't care. It's not something that matters to him. He's very transactional. The letter from the king, that played on his love of monarchies. He loves the trappings of state, and there is no greater example of this than the British monarchy. He's also dazzled by Middle Eastern wealth. But the letter from the king was a great ploy. I don't know how many letters he can send to him, because he also gets bored very easily.
That's why you send him the author and the state visit down the line.
Down the line.
And it keeps him
Stay in
connected.
line.
Yes, exactly. It's not that he doesn't care about history. I don't think he knows history.
It's not something that concerns him. If you understand anything about Trump as a man, I grew up outside of New York City, so I listened to this man's rise during my childhood. And he was absolutely furious most of his life about being in New York City and a wealthy property developer. But he could never get into high society because he was nouveau riche and he was still making money and he was working. And high society in New York City is landed money. And they would never let him into the elite circles. And he resents this. There's a big part of him that resents like old wealth. He likes people who are making money right now. So this is why he loves the tech bros from Silicon Valley, because they're on the cutting edge. And they're also redefining what high society is. This is probably why he was attracted to Epstein, because it's the same thing. It's new wealth, breaking all the rules, doing whatever he wants. This is how he sees the world.
Speaking of breaking with traditions, Trump has often hinted and sometimes directly talked about running for a third term. Although taboo since the 2 terms limits enshrinement in the Constitution, third terms were sought by Presidents Grant, Truman, Wilson, and both Roosevelts. How likely do you think an attempt at a third term is, and what would its ramifications be?
Are you looking at me? I mean, we have American constitutionalists here, but I mean, this is the 22nd Amendment. It is, yes. And I mean, it specifically says 2 terms. It's not even about consecutive or non-consecutive. So Trump says, well, you know, they went together, right? Therefore, it doesn't count. They do count, right? It's very, very clear on that. It's also very clear that if, for whatever reason, you started in a term and you do 2 years, right? Still in that amendment, right? Then that counts against you, right? And that was part of the Truman thing, because this was brought in 1951. And Truman inherited a presidency with Roosevelt dying, right? And it was because of Roosevelt's 4th term this was actually enacted. So constitutionally, there's a serious limit. Now, that doesn't mean much, because this is a guy, I hate to use colloquialisms in something as serious as this, but I mean, he just doesn't care about these sorts of things. And I think even the language of it is highly corrosive, right? So constitutionally, there's a problem. Whether he could do something in practice, I'm interested in everybody else's view. I mean, we are looking at the risk, I think, of coups. You know, and I think the ICE matter was a way, and it's not finished, you know, deeply polarizing society, getting a situation where the streets are so bad that you can declare a type of martial law, suspend normal procedure. I mean, we have a great irony, right? This guy, Trump, is pushing for elections in Ukraine, which is being bombed every day. He wants elections there and actually calls Zelensky a dictator, because Zelensky, who was very legitimately elected, can't hold elections in a country that is being bombed every day, and 20% of which is under foreign occupation. Trump wants elections there, but we could have a situation, as you all know, at least he jokes, and this is very dangerous for any official, let alone a president, to talk about. He jokes about doing away with elections. So what I would worry about is the scenario in which usual process gets suspended.
Yeah, first time since the 1950s we have to worry about this. A president running for a third term. And there have been discussions in the Trump administration about, is it possible for him to run as the vice president, and then if they win the election, J.D. Vance resigns, so he assumes the presidency? If he doesn't run for president, what if we run 2 other Republicans and they win, and we nominate him to the Speaker of the House? Because the Speaker of the House doesn't have to be elected to the House. It can be anybody. And then the 2 Republicans will resign and he'll assume the presidency. They've talked about this, about whether there are mechanisms they can use to bypass the constitutional system and install Trump as a president. Of course, that still relies upon some Republican winning the presidency and then resigning. And that seems very, very unlikely. The bigger question is whether Trump just decides to say, for reasons, we can't have elections. There's a lot of implications that the ICE raids are testing the waters for how you can provoke demonstrations in urban areas in the United States, and then declare those areas to be devoid of law and order, and then you declare martial law. And if you do that during the 2026 midterms, where are all the Democrats elected from? Urban areas. So if you provoke outrage in urban areas and then militarize them, suddenly you can hold an election and win. And that's the scary scenario. I like to think that this is not in Trump's interests. The fact is, he is aging, he is slowing, he is tiring, and he is also very nakedly monetizing this presidency. This is why term limits can be a really bad idea, is because when somebody is term limited and they know that they don't have a future job lined up after this, they have to monetize what they're doing. So Trump is raking in the dollars right now. And if he's raking in the money, he might just say to himself, in 3 years, I'm going to retire, declare this the greatest presidency in the history of the world, and then my first day in retirement, declare the United States an awful place, and I win, because I won, I'm rich. And that's my hope, is that he just lets the presidency go.
The end result of Trump seeking a third term is the end of the United States as we know it. Because people will not sit back and let constitutional order be broken so badly. It comes down to either breaking the constitutional order and breaking the United States. And this is where I hold out hope too. If they attempt to cancel elections, and remember, the United States has witnessed elections during the Civil War. But unfortunately, this time around, the federal government is not the good side. If they attempt to bypass the constitutional structure, whether it's a third term or whether it's suspension of elections, then I think you honestly see certain states saying, enough, we're not playing this game because the rules are no longer being applied. It's problematic because they don't have the military backing, they don't have all of that. But I can't see people like Jimmy Pritzker in Illinois. And my mind's just gone completely blank.
Gavin Newsom.
Thank you, Governor of California.
I know where you're going.
Yeah, thank you. I can't see them accepting that. We're already seeing people speaking out against the authoritarian, dictatorial statements. And my hope is that the American people will respond in appropriate fashion. And we've seen this already. I used to have a picture, growing up, I used to have 2 pictures on my wall. One of them was Abraham Lincoln, right? It's never a bad guy to have on your wall. A bit scary in the dark. And the other one was and I think my parents worried about me a little. And it was a picture from Boston in the early 70s. And there was an African American being attacked by a guy, I don't know if you've ever seen it, with the Stars and Stripes on a pole. And it was during a civil rights violation. And they represented, in my mind, the best and the worst of the United States. And that's what we're seeing today. ICE is the worst. The reaction of the people of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the surrounding counties was the best. They didn't rise to the bait. They did turn out from dressing gowns to people who've never protested before in their life, and including one chap showing up with the only thing he could think of to carry, which was the flag that had been hanging outside his house. And he said he voted Republican in the past. That's what I hold out hope for. I hadn't thought of it, the way you said Trump making money, the Trump family making money, issue them all blanket pardons and let it go. And maybe America can come back from this. And that's my hope. The midterms have to happen or it's game over. Good night, thank you for playing.
We have seen significant protests against Trump's deployment of ICE, as you were just mentioning. Whilst at first firmly domestic protests, there have also been some protests internationally after ICE accompanied Team USA to the Winter Olympics in Milan. Last year, the person by the panel chosen as the sort of surprise figure to watch was Stephen Miller, and so the sort of architect of the immigration strategy. Reflecting on the more recent developments, what do you think is the future of Trump's immigration strategy, and what will the impact be on America?
Well, it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. There's a lot of reports that, Trump campaigns on immigration, but he doesn't necessarily care. He doesn't necessarily care about a lot of policy. The ICE thing is really Stephen Miller. He wants every immigrant out of the United States, regardless of if they've been naturalized or not. And there's a lot of Americans who agree with this sentiment. Still, I think it's 38% of Americans agree with ICE going into cities and forcing out immigrants. And I think it's going to ramp up before the midterms, probably as an electoral strategy. But it does have limitations. The fact is the United States relies upon immigrants. It has always been a country of immigrants. It has always hated those immigrants, but it relies on them. And right now, ICE is targeting inner cities because that's where the liberals are, and you can really annoy them. But if you really want to attack the immigration issue in the United States, you have to go into rural America. What do a lot of immigrants do? They work in agriculture. So if you're really serious about getting immigrants out, you have to go into rural America. And if rural America sees masked agents walking down their streets, seizing members of their community, honestly, this is where the guns are. It's going to get a lot worse than in urban America. And I think if and when that happens, the issue explodes. The United States does have a problem with immigration. Any society, I think, you need to have a border. If you're going to call yourself a nation, you have to have a border that you somewhat control. And the United States does not control either its northern or southern border. It hasn't in a very long time. And it has really terrible policies that haven't been updated largely since the 1980s. And we've known this since the 1980s, that the United States needs to get serious about immigration reform. It could happen. Probably not with this Congress, because this Congress doesn't do anything. But this could provoke actual positive change in America, hopefully.
I mean, it could well be that, imagine we hold the midterms, the Democrats gain the House, the Democrats are going to get the House. If elections are they could, the way things are going, they might even get in the Senate, who knows, things are so crazy right now, who knows. And imagine then you do have a Congress that's doing things, and it does pass an immigration bill, and it does bring in restrictions. America does hate its immigrants for 2 generations, and then it embraces them. 3rd generations, they're Americans. That's right, and then it embraces them. And it's a history too. And I completely agree with everything you just said, except the one thing. We're already seeing, we must remember that the last presidential election was actually pretty darn close. It was pretty, they won all the swing states, but very close, very close. And he's underwater with the exact groups that pushed him over the line. Now, a close election is not a great thing, because if it had been a close election last time, he claimed he won anyway, but he wouldn't have been in power. This time around, that's problematic, because they are in power, and if it's a close election, they'll claim that they won and there was fraud and stuff like that. So it comes back to they have to deal with immigration. I think that's been the problem for the Democrats for, as you say, since the 1980s. I mean, put it this way, my master's degree, which was way back in ancient history times, was an analysis of roll call voting on immigration in the US House of Representatives in the 1990s. And they couldn't get a handle on it then. And it was obviously going to become the heel of the Achilles heel of the Democratic Party. And in many ways, that's what allowed the Republicans to own the issue. And that's ultimately what leads to the situation we are today. Stephen Miller's the problem then, Stephen Miller's the problem now.
Right, how does one talk to that? Agreed. I mean, some of MAGA, I think, exists because of outright fear of immigrants, that, you know, there's, whether it's true or not, but this relative sense of loss. You know, the other is advancing socioeconomically against me and my interests, therefore I'm against. Again, I think one of the ways of dealing with this is to think about interest. Trump interest, MAGA interest, in order to harm in this case. It's something I like. I mean, I heed what you say about ICE going into rural areas. Let's think about the MAGA supporters who rely on, not necessarily illegal, but immigrant labor. Some of it could be illegal. Right? And let them feel the pain of losing those people, the millions, especially farm workers, but others as well. You know, some rich urban Republicans whose gardens, whose kids, right, are being attended to by legal or illegal immigrants. Right? So, I mean, my ideal would be, if we're going to have this ICE situation, that it ideally be retargeted. Now, it's not going to happen, but I think we need to think about appealing to the MAGA constituents who are actually beneficiaries of the status quo. Interests here, I think, work a heck of a lot more than trying to make what probably most of us sympathize with, moral arguments in that. Right? Go for the interests.
Thank you very much. We will now have a short 5-minute break and then about 20 minutes for a Q&A session. If you don't mind giving our panel a round of applause.